Rob here from the Flanagan Homestead. I'm out in the pasture today, checking on the ground, seeing how they are for the sheep and the goats. One of the things that I get asked a lot by new goat owners is, can you have trees in the pasture where the goats are? And my answer would be, you better be willing to give up those trees if you have them. I'm going to show you an example of what they've done to this vine alder here and a few other trees around here, and explain how they killed them, even though they're not eating all the way through. Here's what the tree would grow up like outside the fence when it's not being eaten down by the goats. You can see lots of mini trunks coming up and growing up. Call this a vine alder around here. Here we have a vine alder that was in the pasture before we put the goats in here. And you can see all these branches that are laying down, some of these about as much as 30 feet long, are died off and killed because the goats came in and ate off the bark. So what happens is the goats love to strip the bark, especially certain times of the year when nutrients are coming up and down just inside the bark. There's a sugary sap in there that they like to get into, and then they start stripping the bark. Or when the food is low like this winter, they start stripping the bark. So all these branches that you see laying down here are branches where the goats came in and they started eating the bark off. And then if you follow this up, it's still standing there, but it rotted out and lost its nutrients, and this one broke off. And all these branches are because the goats ate through the bark. So the outer layer of the bark is mostly protection, but just inside layers, there's nutrients, water going up, and sugars from photosynthesis going down. And if you strip the bark off of a tree, even just an inch all the way around, the nutrients can't flow up and down, and the tree will die, whether it's a small round one like this or much larger. So you can see as I back up, the bark was eaten off here where they can get to it, but their branches are so close on the other side that they couldn't get all of it out. And so these branches are still growing up, but as they get in there and eat the rest of that bark, this is probably all going to lay down and fall down. I'll probably cut most of this tree out this year and just burn it, get it out of the way. Going from this tree, you can see a much larger tree laying down here. And what happened here is the goats would walk down the hill where I'm walking right now, and they just started, both they're walking on this and stripping it with their teeth. They took the bark off here, which allowed disease in. There is enough bark on the back side it could have lived, but let some disease in. And so this big old tree, probably 45 feet tall, went down due to some tiny Nigerian dwarf goats. So I'm on my neighbor's property where my pasture runs into, because he wanted me to help clear his land. But on this Doug fir tree, which he wanted to keep, the goats were starting to strip the bark on things. This is almost 10 inches in diameter. It's probably getting big enough now that we wouldn't have to protect it, but I don't know if you can see it on the camera here. There's chicken wire fencing that we had wrapped all the way around this to keep all the way up to where the goats can reach, just so that they can't get their teeth in there and start scraping the bark. Once they open up a small hole and they have access, they tend to just keep working that and working around until they strip more of it, and enough that it's going to kill the tree. So yeah, my neighbor called me one time and said, "Your goats are like dang beavers, we got to protect these trees." So we wrapped the trees that were small enough to get injured with chicken wire, and it seems to be working. If you have to leave it there for several years though, you'll have to loosen up the chicken wire and let it expand. Otherwise it girdles the tree and holds it so it can't grow out, and that will do as much damage as the goats. I'm now standing in a section of the goat pasture that I once had a beautiful pear tree, and I actually had cyclone fencing 8 feet by 8 feet all the way around it, and it was protecting it. It was growing up really nice and well. And then they lifted up the fence one day, got underneath, and just stripped all the bark. And you can see there is no more pear tree here. I just tore it out, roots and all. If you look up towards the barn, right in front, right as in the door opening, you could probably see it there. There's the trunk of a tree. This was a great plum tree, very nice plums, but you could see where bark was stripped, and then this thing got diseased, rotted, and that's what's left of my plum tree. I did have, you could still see the remains of fencing that I had around there, but over time I quit checking it and the goats got in there and ripped the bark out. Here's another Doug fir tree on the pasture that they were eating. I had fencing around this. It's thick enough now that they're not tearing into the bark anymore, but there's enough bark here gone that this tree is growing slower than the other ones. Right behind it, you can see one that's not damaged. Here's the fencing. Actually, the fencing is getting torn off, but this tree is probably also big enough and thick enough bark now that the goats won't damage it. And I'm still in the pasture right now where I've got some big timber and the bark is just too thick on these bad boys for the goats to hurt, but it does keep the weeds down around them, which is great. So I love having goats around my trees if they're not going to hurt my trees. Another story just behind where the camera is, up by the barn, I planted an apple tree before we had goats, and then blackberries grew all the way around it. And I put goats in there, and I didn't protect the apple tree because they couldn't get in, or well, they could, but they had no desire to get in because there's so many blackberries keep working their way in. I was like, I need to keep my eye on that. I need to keep my eye on that. And when they get close to the apple tree, I need to go in and protect that tree. Well, once again, I didn't stay ahead of it. They dug their way through the blackberry bushes, found the apple tree, and I kid you not, this is the most extreme example I've ever seen. I could not find a square inch of bark on that tree from the ground to about my head height. Not a single square inch. And that was like, I had checked it 2 days before I came back, and it was completely gone. So obviously that tree died. So the answer to the question is, can I have goats and trees in the same pasture? Yes, if they're big, strong trees with thick bark like this, or you do a really good job protecting them. But I have protected many trees and over time didn't keep track of what was protecting it and ended up losing the tree. So if the tree is valuable to you, make it really protected. Thanks for joining me on the Flanagan Homestead, where Christmas trees are my business, teaching and cleaning horticulture is my job, and outdoor projects are my passion. Hope to see you again soon. Be blessed, everyone.